The sea remembers everything. It remembers the weight of every ship that ever crossed it, the cries of sailors swallowed whole by its depths, the laughter of kings who thought they could command it. It remembers the birth of islands and the bones that sank beneath them. It remembers the first light that broke across the western cliffs and the first shadow that dared to follow it. And on nights like this, when the horizon dissolves into mist, when the waves climb the sky and the sky falls into the sea, it remembers a name whispered long before men learned to write their histories. Tintagel, a wound carved by salt and storm, perched on the edge of all that was known and all that was feared. Its stones drink the wind. Its towers lean toward the abyss. The gulls circle not as birds but as omens. Here, where cliffs bleed into clouds, the sea never rests. It moves as if alive, as if guarding something that breathes beneath the foam, a memory too ancient to drown. Long before England had a name, before kings drew borders on parchment and priests called them kingdoms, Tintagel stood apart. Not built for defense, nor for glory, but for remembrance, a fortress against time itself. They say it was chosen, not by men, but by fate. For the land beneath its stone is older than kings, older than crowns, older even than sin. The earth here hums with something unspoken, as if the world itself once paused and took its first breath upon these cliffs. When the wind blows from the west, it carries more than salt. It carries voices, fragments of forgotten oaths, half-remembered songs, the faint echo of hooves galloping across centuries. And sometimes when the moon shatters across the water, the waves speak. They do not use words. They use the rhythm of tides, the pulse of the deep, a heartbeat, steady, ancient, impossible. Some say it is the sound of the first king. Others say it is the sound of destiny itself, turning in its sleep. For legends, too, have hearts. They are born not of ink or scripture, but of longing, of what people need to believe when the dark grows too deep. In Tintagel, that longing took shape. It grew out of storm and sorrow, molded by hands unseen. It waited in silence as centuries folded over it like waves upon rock, waiting for a night when men would mistake desire for prophecy. The villagers below speak of it still, of lights flickering upon the cliffs when no one walks there, of footsteps that echo through the ruins when the moon is high. They say if you stand among the broken arches and close your eyes, you will hear it, the faint cry of a child carried by the wind. Some say it is Arthur himself, born not yet, but always. Others whisper that it is something older, something that chose Arthur merely as its vessel. And yet, even among ghosts, this place is patient. It knows that stories are tides. They rise, they fall, they return. Every generation washes against these rocks, leaving behind new names, new sins, new hopes. The stones do not judge. They only remember. So listen closely. Beneath the roar of the ocean, beneath the hiss of wind and the whisper of rain, there is another sound, softer, slower, like a pulse beneath the world. It beats once for the living, once for the dead, and once for all who are yet to come. It is the sound of a heart that was never meant to beat, the sound of a legend that began not in glory, but in shadow. For not all beginnings are bright, not all heroes are born of light. Some are shaped in secret, carved from silence and sorrow, and baptized in the storm. And so the sea keeps its vigil, the cliffs stand watch, and the wind, forever restless, carries the same whisper it has carried since the first night. The name that binds every king, every myth, every dream that England ever dared to believe. Tintagel, the edge of the world, the cradle of a kingdom, the scar where history first learned to bleed. In the heart of a restless kingdom, a fire burned, and before it sat a king, Uther Pendragon. His armor still smelled of war, his crown still heavy with victory. Yet there was no triumph in his eyes, only the reflection of a flame that refused to die. A conqueror in name, but conquered by desire. He had subdued men, crushed rebellions, bent the land beneath his banner. But there are wars no sword can win, wars fought in silence, in longing, in the dark corners of the human heart. For Uther that war had a name, Igraine, the wife of another, the light he could not possess, the peace he could never earn. Each night he told himself it was nothing, a passing thought, a fever of the blood. Yet the more he denied it, the deeper it rooted, until love became hunger. And hunger, a sickness. The sickness of wanting what the gods themselves had forbidden. Outside the storm gathered. Inside so did he. His hands clenched as if they could hold the air, shape it, twist it to his will. But desire is a cruel mirror. It shows men not what they have, but what they lack. And so the mighty Uther Pendragon, Lord of the Britons, chosen by the dragon sign, found himself whispering the words no king should ever speak. I would trade victory itself, if only she would look upon me once more. In that silence another presence stirred. The air thickened, as if the world itself held its breath. From the edge of the tent, where light dared not linger, came the voice of the one who answers such prayers, the prophet, the sorcerer, the man men call Merlin. No greeting, no ceremony, only two men, and between them, the shape of temptation. Uther did not bow. He only spoke, his voice hoarse with sleepless nights. Make me as him, he said. Let me wear his face. His voice. Let me cross the walls of Tintagel unseen. The words hung in the air like smoke. Merlin did not answer. He only looked, for his eyes had seen too many bargains, too many kings who mistook desire for destiny. In the reflection of the fire, he saw both the birth and the ruin of a kingdom. The flame flickered, and for an instant, Uther's face changed, not by magic, but by the weight of his longing, the face of a man willing to give anything, even his soul, to possess what was never his. Merlin's voice came at last, quiet, ancient, almost kind. There is always a way, he said, but every way demands a price. The king did not ask what that price was. Perhaps he already knew. Perhaps he did not care. Outside, thunder tore the sky open. Rain began to fall, slow, relentless, like judgment. The stars turned above them, and in that turning, something shifted, not in heaven, not on earth, but in the space between, where mortal will meets immortal consequence, a pact unspoken, a sin yet unnamed. That night, the King of Britain stopped being a man of flesh and became a creature of fate, his heart no longer his own, his soul already claimed by what waited in the storm. And somewhere far away in Tintagel's darkened halls, a candle flickered without reason, as if it too sensed what was coming. For when desire and power make their covenant, kingdoms tremble. The bargain was made. The night began to turn. The storm came without warning, as if the sea itself had remembered something it wished to erase. Waves rose like mountains, breaking against the cliffs of Cornwall. The wind screamed through the dark, tearing at the world, at the hour, at the silence between two hearts doomed to meet. And upon that raging water, a single boat drifted forward, small, defiant, and utterly lost. In it sat a man no longer himself, his armor left behind, his crown forgotten, his name dissolved in the rain. The thunder above him was not louder than the heartbeat in his chest. For what stirred within Uther Pendragon that night was greater than fear and darker than love. On the cliffs above, Merlin watched. Cloaked in stormlight, he whispered words older than the stars, words that were not spoken so much as remembered by the air. And the air obeyed. It folded upon itself. The world bent in a way that should not be possible. Fire flickered without flame. The sky held its breath. And in that moment between thunder and silence, a shadow began to move like a man. It took form, bone, voice. The eyes of Uther changed first, softened, reshaped into the memory of another. His hands followed, then his mouth. By the time the storm spoke again, he was no longer a king. He was a husband, or rather the echo of one. Thus, Uther Pendragon crossed into Tintagel, not as conqueror, not as man, but as a ghost wearing borrowed flesh. Beneath him, the great gate opened, not to herald him, but to condemn him. The guards bowed, seeing only the familiar face of their lord. The halls glowed dimly with torchlight, shadows stretching like fingers across the walls. The castle breathed, alive, aware, uneasy. And in her chamber, Igraine waited. She turned, and in the flicker of a single candle, she saw him, her husband, her protector, the man she had prayed would return from war. Or so she believed. Her heart softened, her eyes closed. She felt warmth, the kind she had forgotten. But what she held that night was not love. It was prophecy, wearing the face of comfort. And though she did not know it, the child of that deception would one day hold a sword that could break empires and bind nations. Above them, the heavens trembled. The sea raged. The cliffs shook, as if the earth itself recoiled from what had been done within those walls. Lightning struck the sea and tore it open. Rain lashed the stone like chains, and through it all, the whisper of Merlin's voice carried on the wind, neither blessing nor curse, but a witness to the making of destiny. For destiny is not born of righteousness, it is born of choice and the cost that follows it. By dawn, the storm had quieted. The waves lay broken against the shore. In Tintagel, the torches had burned to ash. The bed was cold. The woman slept. And somewhere in the silence, the first heartbeat of legend stirred. When morning came, the tide carried whispers across Cornwall. Whispers that no one dared to speak aloud, yet everyone felt in their bones, that in one night, love and deceit had become one flesh. And from that flesh, a kingdom would one day rise. Morning came with silence. No trumpets, no cheers, no prayers. Only the slow retreat of thunder, rolling away like a god that had seen too much. The rain had stopped, yet the air still trembled, as if the storm had not ended, only moved inside the hearts of men. On the battlefield below Tintagel, the dead lay twisted in the mud. Among them was Gorlois, Duke of Cornwall, the husband, the defender, the man whose name had been borrowed and broken. His eyes, still open, stared toward the cliffs, toward the fortress where, in that same night, his wife had embraced a lie that wore his face. Uther returned to his throne, wearing victory like a shroud. They called him conqueror, savior, king. But even the crown upon his brow seemed to carry the weight of a question, not of whether he had won, but what he had lost to do so. For while the world sang of triumph, Tintagel remembered. In its cold stone halls where salt wind crept through cracks, Igraine sat alone. The chamber smelled of rain and ash. The candle by her bed had burned out, leaving only the soft echo of the sea below. She wept, not for her husband, whose death she did not yet know, but for a feeling she could not name. She could not say which ghost had visited her that night, nor which love she had held. Yet her body carried the truth that her heart could not bear to speak. In her veins the seed of prophecy stirred, a heartbeat that did not belong to her alone. Outside, the cliffs stood like silent witnesses. The gulls circled low, their cries sharp and mournful. The sea, as always, said nothing, but it remembered. And on the shore Merlin stood, his cloak whipped by the salt wind, his eyes fixed on the horizon. That thin line where sky and water never meet. He did not smile. He did not mourn. He only watched, as men always do, when the price has already been paid. For every spell demands its cost, and this one had demanded a kingdom's worth of it. Merlin spoke, though no one stood beside him. "You have taken what was not yours," he said softly, as if speaking to the wind itself. "And from it, a life will rise that will both heal and wound this land." His words drifted out over the sea, carried away, swallowed by the mist, remembered by no one, except the sea itself. The prophecy was not a blessing, it was a warning. For the child that would come, the one born of deception and desire, would grow into something more than human. He would unite a broken nation. He would draw the sword from the stone. He would build a dream called Camelot. But dreams are fragile things, and every dream must live in the shadow of its own beginning. Uther's heart grew hollow in the years that followed. He built towers higher than faith, wars greater than reason, yet no stone could muffle the echo of that storm. He had everything a king could hold, except peace. For what begins in deceit cannot end in silence. The land itself began to change. Forests darkened, rivers whispered, and men spoke of omens. Tintagel stood unchanged, carved against the wind, watching centuries unfold. It remembered. It always would. And far above the crashing surf, Merlin closed his eyes and whispered a final truth, that no crown is ever forged from gold alone. It is also forged from sin, from longing, from the blood of those who never asked to be written into legend. The sea took his words, folded them into its endless song, and thus the price was paid. Seasons turned, and the storm became memory. The blood of battle faded from the stones, washed clean by the patient hands of time. But within Tintagel, something ancient had begun to stir. Months passed, and the whispers that once crawled through the corridors grew into awe, the kind that comes when men sense the weight of something greater than themselves. The torches burned softer. The air felt charged. Even the sea seemed to hold its breath. And then, on a night touched by frost and silence, Igraine bore a son. The castle trembled, not from storm, but from revelation. They say the first cry of the child echoed through every hall, ringing like a bell between heaven and earth. A sound both fragile and infinite, the beginning of something the world would never unhear. In that same hour, Merlin returned to Tintagel. No horns announced him, no guards dared to question his passage. He walked like a shadow through the corridors, the hem of his cloak trailing dust and salt. He found Igraine where light and silence met. A single candle burning beside her, its flame trembling with each breath she took. She did not startle when she saw him. She had expected him. There are moments when souls recognize each other, not from sight, but from sorrow. Igraine looked down at the cradle beside her and whispered, "He will be a great king. He will unite this broken land." Merlin said nothing at first. He only watched the child, a face untouched by time, a name not yet spoken. The firelight caught his eyes, and in them lay not wonder, but burden. For prophets see beyond beauty, they see the cost beneath it. And when he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of both blessing and curse. "He will be loved," he said, "and feared. For his birth was a theft, and fate does not forget its debts." The words hung in the air, trembling like the last string of a harp before silence. Igraine turned away, holding the edge of the cradle as if to steady herself against the gravity of prophecy. She did not understand, not fully, and perhaps that was mercy. Merlin reached out a hand, his fingers hovering just above the child's brow. He did not touch him. He dared not, for he saw not the infant that slept before him, but the shadow of the man he would become. He saw the sword buried in stone. He saw the wars that would burn kingdoms into dust. He saw a round table where loyalty and betrayal would sit side by side. And in the distance beyond it all, he saw a final dawn. A cold battlefield, a crown lying in the mud, and a king dying for a dream that had begun in deceit. "Arthur," he whispered, "a name born not of purity, but of storm and sorrow." The candle flickered. The child stirred, then stilled. The prophet turned away, his cloak sweeping the floor like a tide withdrawing from the shore. Behind him, Igraine watched her son sleep, unaware that destiny had already written his name into every stone of Britain. For history remembers kings in gold and glory, but the earth remembers them in grief. And though the world would one day sing his name as legend, Tintagel would always know the truth, that the greatest of kings was born of the darkest of nights. Centuries have passed, empires have risen and fallen and risen again. Kings have come and gone, their names etched in gold, then forgotten by dust. But Tintagel still stands, battered by waves, haunted by wind. The stones are older now, their edges softened by the centuries. Yet they remember. They always remember, for the sea keeps its secrets, and the cliffs, their whispers. When night falls upon Cornwall, and the horizon burns faintly with the dying sun, the air still trembles with the memory of that one forbidden night, when love defied the law of men and gods alike. The waves still strike the shore as they did then. Some say it is only the sea, others say it is the sound of a heart, still beating, still waiting, echoing through time. They say Arthur was never real, that he was only a story, a dream England told itself when it longed for virtue amid ruin. But truth does not care for belief. Truth is not bound by faith or proof. It endures. carved in stone, carried in stories, and written once upon the heart of a woman who looked out from a window as dawn touched the sea. She did not know what she carried. She only knew that her world had changed, that the silence after the storm was too perfect, too still, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. She stood there, the light brushing her face, unaware that within her, the future of Britain had begun to breathe. And somewhere, across the ages, the sea answers that cry. Not with words, but with waves, as if to say, I remember. For the sea remembers everything. It remembers the night when fate wore a mask. It remembers the voice of a woman who forgave what she could not understand. It remembers the trembling hands of a prophet who saw too far. It remembers a king who was never meant to be, and yet became the measure of all who came after. They call it legend, but legends are only truths that forgot how to die. The name still lingers here, Arthur. Not in the marble of tombs, nor the ink of scholars, but in the salt of the air, in the rhythm of the tides. When the wind shifts and the mist curls low, listen closely. You may hear hooves upon unseen roads, or the hum of a blade drawn not for conquest, but for hope. And if you listen longer still, you may hear something softer. The voice of that same sea whispering to the stones, do not mourn him. He was never meant to stay. He was meant to return. Dawn comes again to Tintagel. The cliffs gleam gold for a moment before the wind claims them once more. The fortress stands, a scar upon the land, a crown of ruin and memory. And somewhere in the deep, where history and myth share the same breath, a single truth endures, that from darkness came light, from deceit came destiny, and from one forbidden night, a legend was born. And so it was at Tintagel, where history and myth made a child of the same night.